All right, my friends, it looks like we are live. So welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm just going to give a few seconds for everyone to come on in and join us. So today we are talking about 4 proven strategies to help you land more donor meetings. And if you're a fundraiser, chances are you're experiencing a lot of challenge around this right now. I'm hearing this from a lot of clients, a lot of colleagues, that increasingly we are finding it more and more difficult to land those donor meetings. So I'm here today to share with you some proven strategies and to help you become more successful on this front. So I am going to dive in just a moment and also introduce myself if you haven't met me yet. But first, what I would love you to do is go ahead and drop a comment below and let me know where you are joining from. I'd love to hear from you. This is one of the best things about going live is it's interactive and in real time. And we have a chance to converse. You have a chance to ask questions. And I always love to hear from you. Let me know where you are joining from. And if we haven't met yet, let me introduce myself. My name is 𝗕𝗲𝗁𝗲𝗄𝗎, and I help fundraising teams develop the skills, strategies, and processes that they need to raise more major gifts. All right, my friends. So go ahead if you're just joining us. Let me know where you are joining from and go ahead and drop a comment below. All right. Now, also, if you're catching up on the replay, which I know a lot of you are because you can't necessarily make it live, I want to say welcome to you as well. And go ahead and use the hashtag replay when you're commenting. All right. So welcome. Catherine's joining us from British Columbia. I see Mike. Hello, Mike. Kaylin, hopefully I am, Sophie, hello, hello. We have Andrea joining us from Halifax. I love this. Hello, Nicole, Momina. We've got Shelly joining us from Dallas. Hello, lots of familiar faces here, which I really, really like. So if you're just joining us, drop a comment. Let me know where you are joining us from. And I also want to invite you, as we're chatting, to drop your comments below or drop your questions below as well, because this can be a great opportunity for you to get some support, help troubleshooting. And chances are, if you're feeling a little shy about a question or challenge, I want to guarantee you that someone who's joining us on this session today is experiencing the exact same challenge for sure. Hello, Drew. Welcome, Catherine, Julie, and Josephine. All right, my friends. So I'm going to go ahead and dive in and start with the first principle I want to talk about when it comes to landing more donor meetings. And I call this making it easy for the donor to say yes. Now, most of us know and have heard and have been taught that face-to-face meetings are the absolute gold standard when it comes to major gift fundraising. And I continue to agree with this. However, I think folks are finding them more and more challenging to book these kind of meetings because let's face it, it is a very significant commitment for the donor to make. It's an especially significant commitment if this is your first connection with them. If it's a donor or a prospect you don't know very well, going straight in and asking for that really big commitment of time and for a face-to-face meeting can end up not necessarily setting ourselves up for success. I wanted to say that I think one of the silver linings of what emerged during the pandemic was this move to more of a virtual meeting format, right? So, I think this makes it actually a little easier to be creative when we're thinking about landing those donor meetings and having those donor conversations, is that we can offer up something that's a little easier to say yes to. Maybe it's a virtual coffee, maybe it's a 20-minute phone chat, maybe it is a face-to-face meeting, but it's actually a 30-minute coffee instead of a 2-hour-long lunch, right? The landscape's changing pretty significantly, and we need to adapt to that as fundraisers. And what we really need to do is make it easy for our donors to say yes. Now, I notice that there's a barrier a lot of us face when it comes to taking this approach with our donors. And we often tend to make assumptions about our donors, right? We make assumptions and we say, oh, my donors are older, they're not going to be interested in using the tech or figuring out Zoom. But I really want to encourage you, instead of jumping to conclusions and making assumptions about what your donors want, let's ask, right? It's so simple. Let's ask. Maybe we offer a couple of different options up if we're just getting to know them so that we can see what they prefer. But I really want to encourage you to be a little bit more creative when you're thinking about booking these meetings, just being flexible, creative, and offering something up that's easier for a donor to say yes to. This is especially important if this is your first time meeting with or having a conversation with a donor. This can be a great door opener. All right, so that was my first tip, a bit more of a tactical tip. So I'm going to shift into tip number 2. This absolutely needs to go along with making it easy to say yes. And this is more, I think, of a perspective shift. And that is that when we are going into making a request for a meeting or sending an invite for a meeting, we need to look at it from the donor's perspective. And I'm always thinking, what's in it for me? We've probably heard that around if you're in marketing, communications, but thinking about it, if I'm the donor and you're connecting with me and asking for a meeting and asking for my valuable time, I am wondering and I'm thinking, what's in it for me? So a big mistake I see a lot of nonprofits make is they often tend to go into their donor communications, their invites to donors, really like focusing on the organization. So all the communications are about our achievements, our programs, our stats, our awards. And I call this the information fire hose, right? So we tend to often be trained to kind of point the information fire hose about all of our accomplishments, how great we are, how much we offer, and point that fire hose at the donor, right? And what I also like to say is, when we think about fire hoses, they're not accomplishing what we think they are, right? They're not drawing the donor closer. They're actually pushing the donor away. So instead of taking that information fire hose approach, I really want you to step back the next time that you're sending a meeting invite and really think about what's in it for me. I'm the donor, I'm opening this email, I'm picking up this phone message, I'm picking up the phone, however you're connecting with folks, and I'm wondering what's in it for me. So I'll share with you what I often call an old adage, but it's an adage for a good reason. And that is one that's really important to put into action. And that is, you've probably heard this, if you want money, ask for advice. And if you want advice, ask for money. But the key here really is about asking for advice. It doesn't need to necessarily be advice, but really what we want to do is engage the donor in a conversation, right? It is human nature that we really like to be asked for advice, for feedback, for our impressions, right? We want to enter in to this opportunity thinking about what's in it for a donor and really positioning ourselves to have a great, interesting conversation. So I really want to encourage you, instead of taking what I see as the really common approach, you probably sent one of these emails saying something along these lines like, so-and-so, I'd love to have the opportunity to meet with you and update you on some of the things that are going on in our programs right now, right? When I read that as a donor, I'm not seeing what's in that for me. So how do we flip that around? What are we asking for? Are we asking to understand a little bit more about what their philanthropic priorities are? Are we asking for their impressions, their feedback, their advice? So if you are not having success, especially in your first contact with donors or prospects trying to book a meeting, just revisit that in addition to what kind of meeting you're asking for. What's in it for the donor, right? Let's flip that around and figure that out. All right, so I'm going to pause here just because I see lots of comments coming in. And Mike says, give them a chance to say no. That's a really good point, Mike. And actually what I wanted to also touch on here is being really clear about the purpose of our meeting. I think that sometimes donors are not necessarily there when we're just sort of generally asking for a meeting and they're unclear of the purpose. This can be a real barrier to saying yes as well. So I always like to be very, very clear. I would like to meet with you because and sometimes, depending upon the nature of the relationship, I may even say, you know, I'm not coming to you to ask you for a donation right now. What I do want to do is understand more about your perspective on X, for example. So that's something I really am going to recommend to you, is that you think about what's in it for me when it comes to your donors. All right, so I want to pause here and encourage you to go ahead, if you're just joining us, if you have any questions, if you have any comments, if you have any wisdom that you want to share with the group here today, I really invite you to go ahead and leave us a comment, because the fun thing about these live sessions is this is actually an opportunity to be interactive, to ask your questions, share your challenges, or maybe even share your successes. I'd love to hear from you. If you've applied these principles I've talked about so far today, what kind of success are you seeing? We'd love to hear about your success as well, because that can inspire those of us who are maybe feeling a little bit challenged around this right now. So just to recap, we want to make it easy for the donor to say yes in terms of the type of meeting we're asking for. We also want to enter into every invitation looking at it from the donor perspective. So rather than pointing the information fire hose at the donor, what we want to do is think about what's in it for me. When I'm opening up this email, I'm getting this invite, I want to understand what's in it for me as a donor. And the thing that is going to be most attractive to me typically is an opportunity to share my wisdom, an opportunity to share my priorities, to engage in a conversation, and so on and so forth. Now, there's some nuances to this once you get a little further down a road in a relationship with a donor. Once you've had the opportunity to have a meeting, you'll be a little bit more clear, I hope, on what kind of priorities that are important to the donor, right? So you know, that can definitely, you can start customizing things, but I would really recommend that you understand this better. Hi, Nadia is joining a little bit late and wants to say, I attest the asking for advice angle is such a good one. Make the meeting about them and not about you or your organization. Thanks, Nadia. That is some very good advice. And just even that one shift can end up opening up a lot of doors for you in my experience. So great, I love that. And love to hear from other folks as well. Go ahead and weigh in here. And while you do that, I'm gonna go ahead and move on to my tip number 3, and that is going to be making sure that you're mixing up your communication channels, right? So if you're asking what's in it for me for the donor, you're going to be bringing greater value to the table for the donor by offering them a chance to be more meaningfully engaged in your cause, right? But what I want to make sure that you're also doing is mixing up those touch points. What I'll sometimes hear from folks is, you know, I've emailed somebody 3 times and I haven't heard back, right? So I'm feeling really discouraged. So let's say if you're starting with email and you're not getting a response, let's mix this up and pick up the phone, right? We want to pick up the phone. Or let's say we might start with an old-fashioned letter, talking about introducing yourself, talking about why you might like to meet, and committing to following up with them by phone to book a convenient time for you to connect. So I really want you to think about this. Mixing up those channels is very important. Again, even more so at the beginning when we're trying to land that first conversation, because you don't necessarily know how the donor is going to respond. Maybe they're very connected to email. Maybe they're phone people. You know, we don't know yet. So we really need to try those multiple channels and not just say, oh, 3 emails, right? Like it didn't work. So I'm going to stop trying now. Because yeah, I think this is really important. I'm just going to pause here to say, because we're getting some juicy advice in here in the comments. I want to share this. So Caitlin is saying, I've been receiving more responses when I provide specific times that I'm available to meet. That is a great tip, to make it easy for the donors to say yes. I let them know I'm flexible. They can provide their availability if those times don't work. I love this, Caitlin. It's great advice. Julie sharing, offering a virtual meeting with a clear objective and a short time limit continues to be very successful. So you're hearing it here. These are practices and principles that frontline major gift fundraisers are putting into effect, and these are working. So don't give up if you're having a hard time landing those donor meetings. Keep trying. And this is a great option that you are you're mixing up those communication channels and you are offering up that virtual meeting. I love that, Julie. That's great advice. All right. Shelley, many of my donors are older, and I did make the assumption about them not necessarily wanting to use tech, but several have told me they learned Zoom and FaceTime and particularly use it often to connect with their friends and family. That's a great point. Mike, my parents are in their mid-80s and are regular Zoom users. I have to say, my parents are very tech savvy as well and are in the same generation. Julie shares, and I agree with you, Julie, with all the channels available, phone is often overlooked, but it really is effective. And I would say that as well, is that I think phone is falling more and more out of favor. It could be a generational shift, depending upon what generation you identify as a part of. Phone is not necessarily something that people feel super positive about, but I would say the phone is a crucial tool in your major gift fundraising toolbox, right? So picking up the phone and becoming more comfortable with that is something that's a really important skill to develop. The donor is not necessarily expecting calls. It's kind of like cards in the mail, pardon me, says Julie. All right, so yes, Josephine is saying, where I am reading out the juicy advice, but it's in the comments. I am actually coming to you from my StreamYard studio. But if you're watching this, for example, in LinkedIn and you're live, you should see the comments below. But because we ultimately will share this replay in a couple of different places, I am reading out as much of the juicy advice as I can so that you're able to take part in this. All right. So yes, we're all kind of agreeing we really need to be mixing up our communication channels: letter, email, phone call, FaceTime. I've heard folks even talk about texting. I wanted to add one more thing into the mix that I think is one of the most underutilized ways to connect with donors, and that is personalized video. I've been talking about personalized video for a few years now, and some folks are taking this up, but it still is not as commonly used as I would think it should be. So if you're new to personalized video, it's simply a video that's, for our context, when we're thinking about major donors, it's a video that's created and customized for a specific individual viewer. And there are a ton of great platforms out there that are really affordable that will allow you to do this. I think DonorView is one of them that's specific to fundraising. Also, one that I use is, there's Bonjoro, but there are quite a few of them that enable you to actually send an individualized video to connect with your donors. So really recommend that. And I'd love to hear from you. If you have tried personalized video, I just want you to go ahead and drop the word video in the comments. So if you've tried personalized video, drop the word video in the comments. I think it's a very great opportunity, and it's actually really, now that there are a broad variety of different platforms this is available on, this is something you can do in a small, medium, large, or very large shop. So it's something I think will really help you stand out in the donor's inbox as well. I see Andrea's been using personalized video. I love that. It's commonly used for thank yous. Melissa and Caitlin, that's great. I love seeing folks tapping into the power of personalized video. It's often used for stewardship, but I want to also introduce this idea of actually bringing it into the mix when you're trying to book a meeting, or if you're even following up on next steps after a meeting. I've actually done that as well. let's say I've had a meeting and I want to recap the next steps. Right? How nice is that somebody's actually showing up, their face is showing up in your email, and you get a short recap video. Again, personalized video is one of those things that's important to mix up because not everyone's going to open it. But if you are thinking about layering in different channels, personalized video is great. Nadia, great question. Just about the idea of getting folks on board internally around using personalized video. And I would throw that back out to the folks that are using video. What has been helpful for you in terms of getting your team, your internal folks on board when it comes to the idea of using personalized video? We're seeing Andrea's using ThankView. Yeah, I've heard great things about that as well. And you can text and email the videos. I think it's one of those things, it can be very useful to test, Nadia. So I'm thinking, if you're perhaps selecting, maybe you do a small pilot, right? Maybe you do a small pilot, you get a couple of your team members on board, knowing that you do have a team, and that you do maybe a test of mixing in personalized video. So I'd also want to understand, more about kind of what the perceptions are internally about personalized video. If it's not something that people are feeling very keen on the uptake around, I'd want to understand what the barriers are around that, right? Like, is it like a, we don't want the added expense? Then that's great. We can say, okay, we've got actually a really, we've got some really affordable options for us to play with. Let's pilot this. It'll be a very small investment up front. Let's pilot this and see how this works and see what the response is like. Let's say we do a short 8-week pilot on that. So I think there may be a few ways for you to sell this internally. I think absolutely, yeah. I think, you know what, I think you'd be surprised if you look into some of the platforms, how affordable they are. I know Bonjoro for sure has a nonprofit offer, and it is typically like quite surprisingly affordable. I know if you are going into some of the much bigger, the much bigger systems, it can be a bit more of an investment. So maybe it is starting with a more affordable platform, doing what I would call a bit of a pilot, and seeing where you can go from there. So I love this. I love there's enthusiasm for personalized video. And I really want to encourage you to give this a try and look into this. All right. Yes, so Catherine's just asking, why is there a cost associated with video? You could absolutely do it on your phone. I think what happens with these platforms is, I'll just spend another like 30 seconds on this. With these platforms, they actually have a place that the videos are actually hosted, right? So there's a place for the videos to be hosted, especially if you're a larger organization. It can be a little bit tricky, for example, to host on YouTube, et cetera, or necessarily do it on the small scale. And absolutely, you could simply do a video, and if it's very short, send it as an attachment. But yeah, for a longer video, or if you're a large organization that needs to be doing this to scale, the platforms I mentioned can be very helpful, right? So yes, Julie, there's a perception of being too informal. And I've heard that before as a barrier, which is really interesting, that there is a bit of a perception around video, especially more informal video, as being perceived as a bit unprofessional, for example. But from my perspective, I think that there is just such a great opportunity there for warmth, for connection, for authenticity that doesn't necessarily exist in the same way when you're thinking about email, right? So this is an opportunity for the donor to hear your voice and see your face, and just as an entirely different channel and context for folks. and can be especially helpful as well. For example, if you've got somebody who's really influential within your organization, like a CEO, and that kind of thing, is like, it's a great way, it's an easy way, it's a quick way to give folks access to that, if you will, right? So, okay, I'm gonna pause there just because I want to make sure we don't run out of time before I get to my final strategy for you in terms of landing more donor meetings. And that is making sure that you are being more persistent. All right. I have noticed that most fundraisers, I will say, give up far too soon when it comes to trying to land a meeting with a donor. And I'm going to borrow a statistic from sales, because I believe all of us are in sales, not just fundraisers, but all of us are in sales in some capacity, right? It can take up to 8 or more, I'd say, even heard increasing numbers, 8 or more touch points before you can qualify a lead or a prospect. Now, most people, fundraisers included, tend to give up after 3 or 4 attempts to contact their donors or their prospects, right? So just think about that and see if that lands true for you. So if you're thinking 3 or 4 times, okay, that's it, no more. And perhaps those 3 or 4 times were all by email. And perhaps we weren't thinking about what's in it for my donor as well, or making it easy. So I really want to encourage you to go back, not to give up too soon, and to be more persistent when it comes to landing meetings with your donors. I'm going to talk now a little bit more about why this happens, right? Because we've done it, we know people who have done it, we've tried 3 or 4 times, and we've said, okay, that's it, I'm done. And I want to say a lot of this comes back to mindset. And while tactics are important and strategies are important when it comes to majoring at fundraising, I would say there's probably nothing more important than examining and being aware of the mindset that you're bringing into these connections. Because let me know if this sounds familiar. When I'm working with clients and I'm working with students, sometimes when we dig a little bit deeper on why we're stopping at 3 to 4 efforts to connect with our donor, I'll hear something like this: I don't want to pester them, right? Maybe your language is a little different. I don't want to be pestering this donor anymore. So I just want to pause there, and maybe your language is a little bit different, but I want you to reflect on, when you do stop trying to book a meeting after, say, 3 times or 4 times, what's going on in your head? Chances are it's saying something to you, and chances are it may be saying something to you like, you know, if I follow up again, they're going to think I'm bothering them, right? You might be thinking, oh, you know, I know what's happening, right? This person is just too busy to meet with me. So really want to recommend to you that if you are stopping too soon, that you're looking at what is the reason for you stopping after 3 to 4 times. So I'd love to hear from you if anyone's feeling particularly brave. Is there anything you've noticed when you've gone into sort of the 3rd time of following up, the 4th time of following up? What are you noticing that your brain is telling you about following up with a donor? And maybe following up with the donor for a 6th time or a 7th time or an 8th time. So I'd love to hear from you. What is your brain telling you when you are thinking about going to that 8 or more times of following up with a donor? Looking forward to hearing your comments on this one. And what the broader reframe I really want you to take away from this session is to start working on thinking of yourself as a fundraiser as bringing immense value to the table with your donor, okay? You are a valuable facilitator, you're a guide, you're an expert in your organization, and you have so much to offer this donor when you are asking for this meeting. Because I think oftentimes that shift can make all of the difference, right? I want to tell you, donors want to achieve change in the world. And this is not something they can do alone. This is not, I don't care how much of a millionaire you are, a billionaire you are. If you want to achieve change in the world, chances are the best way to do that is by partnering with an organization like yours that's going to have the expertise, the capacity, the services, the ability to affect this change you're looking to affect. So, okay, my brave speak. Michelle, I love a brave speak. I don't want to seem desperate if I'm following up too much. They're obviously, Andrea's saying, they're obviously not interested. Obviously, they're not philanthropic. I love this. This is very juicy. Okay, I am sure you have more important things to do than spend time with us. I tend to often think they're just not interested, right? We tell ourselves a lot of stories, and this is just the way our brains work. You are not alone in this. It happens to me. It happens to every other fundraiser that you meet. We tell ourselves stories when we don't hear back from our efforts to connect with our donors, right? And somebody's saying, I'm sorry, I can't say it. It says LinkedIn user is asking if I live in your head. It's just my 25 years of frontline fundraising experience. So maybe I do live in your head. The cringe factor goes up with each subsequent follow-up with no response from a donor. So if you are feeling similarly, I hope you'll feel a little bit inspired by hearing from other seasoned fundraisers that these thoughts and feelings come up when we're following up with our donors, and that's okay. And I think what we need to do is just be aware that they are stories that we're telling ourselves, right? We don't know until we hear it from our donor's mouth. We just don't know what's going on. My brain is telling me if they wanted to connect with me, they would have done it by now, right? So we've all heard that. We just can't know what's in somebody's head. So I really do encourage you. I've experienced this as well, right? You know, I can think of times where I've reached out to a donor. I've been mixing up the channels. I've been picking up the phone, email, letter. You know, I'm making sure I'm thinking about what's in it for them, you know, and just at the point where it's like, oh, you know, I've reached out so many times. I might hear back from a donor saying, oh, I'm so glad you've been so persistent because, you know, I've been on, you know, a multi-month adventure. Something's been going on in my life, but I'm very glad that you have been continuing to try and continuing to follow up with me. So I think until you hear from a donor that what is actually going on in their head, you don't necessarily know. So watch out for those stories. And I appreciate you sharing so many of them because I think these are all really common challenges that we're facing as fundraisers, right? That our brain's telling us, nope, they're not interested. They're not philanthropic. They're too busy. I don't want to pester them. Maybe I'll seem desperate. So being aware of those thoughts is probably one of the most important things that you can do when you're thinking about landing more donor meetings. So this has been such a rich and lively and wonderful conversation. So I want to say thank you to you. If you've enjoyed this session, whether you joined us live or you're catching up on the replay, first, I want to say thank you for sharing your wisdom and participating with us. And second, I want to invite you to stay in touch with me because I do these live sessions at least monthly, and I always share the information in my newsletter. So if you're interested in this, I have included the link in the video description. You can sign up for the Major Gift Insider. It's my roundup of great major gift resources for you. And I'll make sure to keep you apprised of these sessions as they come up. I am going to answer a couple more questions before I wrap up. But I did just want to say thank you and keep us kind of in the time frame I committed to. Thank you for joining us, and do keep in touch. Go ahead and sign up for the Major Gift Insider, and I would love to see you next month when we do our next live session. So I've just wrapped up with a couple of final questions. I can never leave a question unanswered in these. What do we do if someone basically brushes us off with, I've considered the materials. If I have questions, I will be in touch. That is a great question. So I'd say there's a few ways that you can approach this. First is actually looking back on the whole relationship and seeing if maybe the materials are going to somebody too soon. Sometimes we lead with, here's the case, right? Sometimes we lead with like, here's the case, let me know if you have any questions. So that's just I would say like a process improvement piece, in the sense of, if they've already got the materials, maybe we change our approach in terms of, we're booking the conversation to understand more about the donor before they get the materials. If that's not inside your control, there's a couple things that you can do around this. Is like, of course, I always want to respect the wishes of the donor, but you could come back, you could come back with a reframe, for example, if you know that this is something they're interested in and considering, just thinking about how you can come back with, for example, new opportunities to connect. If something has come up that's related to the request, for example, new information, new news, an opportunity to come for a tour, that's a great opportunity to kind of get back in touch. But yeah, I would say overall, looking back over how the process works, if they do in fact, are they getting materials too soon? This is quite a common approach, that folks will like send something. I don't tend to do that until I've got a clear understanding of what's going on with the donor. Am I at the point where I'm sending them a proposal, so on and so forth. So thinking about that for sure, and definitely offering yourself up as a resource, right? Like, I'm here to support you. I'm here to make sure that we're, that we're lining you up in terms of your interests with the best possible match in terms of what you want to achieve internally. So just really positioning yourself also as like a resource and an expert as well. And, definitely throwing more value back into the mix a little further down the road as well can be helpful. So do come at it. Again, like, I would say that to me unto itself is not someone saying, don't get in touch with me again, but I would be very clear about the value I was providing the next time I did get in touch, and how it related to their interests, and the fact it was a new opportunity, for example, and that we want to keep them updated and in the loop, because we know how important this is to them. So yeah, I mean, that can be tricky, but I would say my main advice is, for next time, let's go back and look at the overall system and process and understand whether or not we're leading too quickly with a case or materials, right? Because that can be something that we lean on as fundraisers, occasionally too heavily. So that would be my advice on that. I hope that's helpful. And on that, I am going to go ahead and wrap up. Good. I'm glad that's helpful. That's helpful. But I wish you good luck with it. And I would say, again, entering into it with always thinking about the mindset and what stories our brains are telling us is super useful. I'm seeing folks loving the suggestion about personalized video, and I'd love to hear from you. You can always drop a comment here as well. If you've tried any of these techniques, I want to know, and they work. I want to know even if they don't work and you're facing some challenges here. But stay in touch, connect with me, drop me a line by email, send me a direct message. Would love to hear about your successes and your challenges. And I hope to see you next time. Looking forward to it, and wishing you best of luck with using these proven strategies to land more donor meetings. All right, my friends, we'll see you next time.